First of all, let me introduce myself just briefly about my research field. So, to tell the truth, I have a genuine interest in the topic of sustainability, in the topic of how these sustainability-related issues might be integrated or factored into the investment analysis. So, what I'm doing, I'm trying to put together such areas as finance, environmental economics and reporting. And it's also one of the dimensions of our NRCO Center at European University. And we also try to establish a dialogue platform with the companies who are trying to provide not only the conventional approach, so then we can visit the website and see these financial filings, of the company for like in the investor section. But what we are doing, we are trying to go an extra mile. We are trying to create for the companies I would say their platform where these companies can learn how to create the extra dimension for the investment analysis. So, namely, sustainability-related disclosures. Then I have been preparing for this lecture. I was thinking, what could have been more exciting, in inverted commas, than talking about the reporting standards, and not just the conventional reporting standards, but the ones that are dedicated to the sustainability area. I'm pretty sure you have heard a lot about sustainability. It's one of the buzzwords that are currently on the rise, and then I realized that I have to simplify the approach and introduce as many examples as possible, just to make it more, practice-oriented. Because how to put all these reports, how to delineate the main practices in 1 hour lecture, it might be quite difficult. But what I will try to do, I will try to provide you the insights so what basically ESG stands for. By the way, do you know what ESG stands for? Have you ever, not really? Any lucky guess?
Environment something.
Okay. Basically, it stands for environment, for issues. It stands for, S stands for social issues, and G stands for corporate governance. So we will talk about different metrics and indicators that are used by the companies in order to create this extra financial dimension by, I would say, disclosing the data on environmental issues like energy efficiency project, like emissions of CO2, like involvement in the different projects that are dedicated to the preservation of biodiversity. That's usually these metrics, this project will fall into the category of environmental performance of the company. Then we will talk about the social component, how the employees are treated, what is the role of management in addressing these issues, and things like that, how the local communities are engaged into the projects of the companies. And their third component is G component, and it stands for corporate governance. Usually we will talk about how the execution of projects of corporate social responsibility, of some other regulation, how all these issues are integrated, disclosed, monitored by the company. So these are three, I would say, pillars of the ESG analysis that is used more and more by different companies. Okay, so you have never come across with the term ESG, then even more tricky question. Have you ever heard about TCFD, SASD, or CDP initiative? Not really. Wonderful. So definitely you will learn a lot new things today during the lecture. So I will walk through these main elements and now I can tell you that TCFD helps us to disclose information related to the climate change. Then SASB, it's some kind, represents an integrated approach. The environmental component, the second one, the social component, and also the corporate governance. Yeah, so you can keep in mind that when we are talking about the SASB standards, we are talking about all three components. And CDP, also not? No? What a shame. Basically, when we're talking about CDP, it's also disclosure of the climate-related information, but there is one very important but. If we are talking about the TCFD, it provides some kind of methodology how to disclose climate-related risks. Think about the recipe. You want to cook a dish, and not only you have to go to the shop to buy the ingredients, but you also need to know how to do it. So you need some kind of methodology, instruction how. And I would say TCFD exactly answers to this question, and I will try to go into detail and shed the light how basically this initiative might be integrated by using an example of the project in which we have been involved and have been working for almost 7 months. And I will try also to present lessons learned and some insights. Yeah, so I will try to introduce challenges which unfortunately companies might encounter, then they will make the decision to integrate TCFD into analysis. Yeah, so we can talk about TCFD in terms of recipe. Then CDP, it's, I would say, questionnaire. Yeah, so it's some kind of ingredient. Yeah, so what has to be that has to be included into the analysis. There are different forms of CDP questionnaire. We can talk about the carbon disclosure, we can talk about the information related to water use, and also stakeholder analysis. Forests also might be included into this disclosure approach. If we are talking about SASB, again, the best possible way is to think about SASB as an ingredient for your recipe. It's the set of different metrics and indicators that might be used for 77 different industries. It is important to know, in a moment I will go into detail, that SASB approach, it is sector-specific approach. So you cannot use the same recipe for different dishes. And it means you need a tailor-made solution for every sector. And okay, that was the second question of my short poll. The third one, do you agree with the statement that all companies have to disclose this sustainability related information? Yeah, okay. Agree. Wonderful. So basically the main aim of my lecture, my intention was to convince you that you would agree with this statement. Yeah, so I would like to show you by citing different examples that basically introduction of an extra dimension, it's not a side to the main event, how it is unfortunately frequently treated by many companies, but it should be a mainline approach, just definitely additional one to their conventional financial approach, but it has to be a must for the companies. Okay, yeah. So if to put aside this short poll that I wanted, to introduce to you, I would like to outline the main structure of the lecture. Then I was again preparing to the lecture. I've decided to simplify it to the extent in order to create a lecture that would be digestible for their students and participants who have never come across that kind of, I would say, analysis. And by doing that, I was focusing on 3 main questions. The first one, what? So basically, what is an ESG analysis? Yeah. Then the second question, for sure, why? So why so many companies at the moment, especially then we are talking about the international companies, they start disclosing these sustainability-related issues. So what kind of benefits they might get while they are disclosing, and what kind of costs basically might be reduced or mitigated by introducing that kind of ESG analysis. And the third one, and I would say one of the most important questions, is how to do that. Yeah, so there are many reports that have been released so far just to delineate the scope of sustainability-related disclosure, but still, I would say there is no unified, universally applicable and acceptable approach that is used in order to disclose this type of information. I will use our pilot project with the 4 leading Russian companies. So before we will, I would say, dive into more into the definitions to the sustainability-related disclosures that are given by different regulators. What I would like to do, I would like to introduce these concepts to you, and as you can see on the slide, there is a soup of different abbreviations. Yeah, so I'm not going to force you to memorize all of them, so that's not the purpose of this lecture, but what I would like to show you is what makes each of these initiatives unique, and why all of them, to a greater or to a lesser extent, are used by the companies, definitely under different circumstances. If we are talking about the GRI, I would say it's one of the oldest reporting initiative that is helping again to show how to disclose this ESG information. Again, keep in mind all 3 components: environmental, social, and corporate governance. But there is an important point that you have to keep in mind, is that GRI is not aimed at looking at the issues that are materially, that are financially material. If we will focus on the initiative, on the initiatives in the middle, we can see that 3 of them, CDSB, SASB, and TCFD. I would say, I do know that then you will walk out of the room, you will never be able to memorize this initiative. Therefore, the best idea to think about them is to memorize. The SASB is focusing on the 3 areas, and it is looking at the let's say, indicators that are used in a decision useful way, and that are again material based. Yeah. Then we are talking about the CDSB and TCFD. Both of these initiatives, they are climate related. Yeah, so we are focusing only on one component, on E component, that relates to the climate change. I think that the first thing that will come to your mind, then you will look at this initiative, is that, okay, it's a burden for the company. Yeah, I think that this idea might appear in your head. And to tell the truth, that was the first reaction of all the companies with which we were discussing. We have been discussing the issues of sustainability-related disclosures. At the moment, unfortunately, we can find many eye-catching reports, but all of these reports, they quite often they are lacking some usefulness, if we can so. They are not showing how, let's say, sustainability issues are linked, let's say, to their financial statements. And therefore, companies quite often treat them as burdensome. Another question that also has to be asked is how, should these disclosure standards be mandatory, or they have to be imposed, like they should be imposed by the government, by the legal authorities, or they should be voluntary. Yeah, so to date, and that's also another important feature of all of these 5 elements, all of these initiatives, they are not legally binding. So basically, the company won't be penalized for non-compliance with these standards. And like many experts, and they prone to think that without proper yardstick, and I would say all of these elements, all these initiatives, they represent some kind of a yardstick that help to measure the sustainability-related dimension. And many experts, they think that this yardstick has to be, let's say, regulated by the government. So the companies have to disclose this type of sustainability-related information. Otherwise, this ESG analysis is doomed to be just, some kind of a supplement to their main annual reporting, and it still will be like the side event to the main show. So since we are talking about this economic viability, so the companies have to understand why they should use these different initiatives, and how they different one from another. And also given the fact that there is a need for this legal yardstick, so we need some kind of a legally regulated play field for the sustainability issues. Definitely, we have to create some kind of a criteria, in order to make them, let's say, to make this initiative economically viable and legally binding. I'm pretty sure that you have heard about the requirements that usually should be fulfilled for their financial statements. We usually talk about the clarity of information. We are talking about comparability of this information across different, let's say, companies and sectors. Then it should be consistent. Quite often it is happening, then they see the report and the companies start disclosing information in one way, and let's say CO2 emissions by site, and then they start disclosing this information by operational stage, and all this for sure might be, all these discrepancies, they might be quite confusing for the investor. For any other consumer of information that is provided in the report. Then, for sure, if we are talking about the commonly accepted principles, we are talking about reliability of the information. We want to be sure that this information is based on some evidence, on some studies, that basically, so we can trust, to this data. we have to minimize this burden. If you do remember that many companies, they're expressing their concerns that it might be time consuming and also entail high costs, that we have to provide such a yardstick for disclosure that will minimize costs, but at the very same time it will maximize benefits for the investors, for the consumers of this information. And another two extremely important components or principles for the disclosure of the extra financial information, and I would say exactly these two elements, they help to stand out against the background of, let's say, general approach. And these two issues, two elements, are that the disclosures, they have to be financially material, that there is a need to establish a link, so basically you want to, companies, they're looking for some kind of formula that might be used in order to identify and to quantify, but better maybe to say to quantify their sustainability related impact. So one of the approach to link it to the revenues, to the cost structure, in order to show to investors that, let's say, this environmentally friendly project will lead to, let's say, cost saving, or some extra, let's say, creation of the green product will lead to the extra revenues. So these are important features for the companies, for the regulators, and for other stakeholders that are involved in the disclosure process. And another important element is that it should be decision useful. So basically, there are for sure, then we're talking about the application of the sustainability based information or sustainability related information. We can talk about different products that will be created by using this information. We can talk about the index. We can talk about the sustainability scores that also disclosed by the rating agencies. And we can talk about their sustainability label. So I would say three of these products that are used by different types of investors, they might be constructed and created based on their sustainability related data. So I hope that now I have managed at least to delineate the scope of these initiatives that are used in order to disclose sustainability related factors. And the second question that I asked is basically why. So why it is important to understand the financial impacts of sustainability related factors. To date, I would say a lot of forces, they have been converging in order to create this play field, and in order to explain what is sustainable, what project will fall into this category and which one will not. Then also one of the most frequently mentioned and an initiative that it is at the moment is on the rise, it's the taxonomy that has been created by the European Union that is trying, to create a system of these sustainability-related ratings, and different metrics and indicators that might be used. It also tries to give some generic definitions to each of the component, and also it tries to categorize different financial options, sustainable financial instruments, like green bonds, like green loans, that also that basically require some extra support in order to survive, against the conventional investment approach and against the conventional financial instruments. Then I would say at the moment it's like the European Union is a paragon of virtue. Yeah, then when we're talking about the sustainability and green finance. But we shouldn't forget about one of the world financial centers and initiatives that are, let's say, initiated by the government of United Kingdom. In July of 2019, they issued the Green Finance Strategy. And they have an intention, basically, to create a new requirement for all listed companies and large asset owners to disclose the information that is in line with the TCFD recommendation. And the companies that are listed, let's say, on the stock exchange in London, they will have to do that by 2022. Yeah, so it's already, you can observe that we are gradually moving to the situation then these initiatives, they won't be just subjected to the free riding, but they step by step will be part of the the regulatory framework, yeah, that is applied to the conventional financial transactions. Then, for sure, areas, countries where more stringent carbon budgets are applied, more stringent environmental requirements are applied to their disclosure standards of the company, then for sure they need some kind of protection. They have to create a belt that will protect them from the venues and countries where companies, producers, let's say, of some products or materials that do not comply with the stringent, let's say, climate-related or environment-related regulation. By saying that, I want to draw your attention to the carbon border tax. Yeah, so that's one of the initiatives that is at the moment under consideration. So it's still not in place. But why it is important is that this initiative is aimed at protecting energy-intensive industries in the European Union just to shield them against the let's say companies from the countries where there are no climate-related regulation, or where this environmental standards are quite lax. Yeah, so this is some kind of protection, yeah, or shield against companies that don't want to follow the mainstream of, let's say, of green trends in the European Union or in the UK, in the United States, and still are lagging behind this, let's say, advanced approach. Just to sum up and to provide you with the, I would say, some takeaways, yeah, interim takeaways, let's put it this way. At the moment, we can observe that this yardstick, that is this definition of what is sustainable and what is not, it has been already created, and some criteria might be found and are provided by their non-profit organizations like CDP, TCFD, SASB, and so on, that have been already mentioned. What is important is, to disclose this information is one part of the equation. Another part is that we have to monitor the execution of these disclosures. It's important to have a control over the general disclosure process. And what is even more important is that the companies, they have to be awarded, if they perform above average, and for sure the companies, they have to be penalized for non-compliance. That's also these 4 pillars. They will enable the creation of this this extra dimension to the investment analysis. So it will enable the creation of the sustainability-related dimension. So the first reason why I hope it's clear, because there are growing requirements for disclosures, that are, let's say, pushed by different regulatory authority. I would say also due to rising awareness, many investors, including retail investors, they start insisting on the inclusion of this ESG analysis by the companies. And so if we are talking about other reasons why it is important, it's for sure better access to capital. So do you remember I was talking about this financial materiality of the ESG factors and how to quantify it, how to get it basically. Then for sure we have to understand that if the company disclose this sustainability related information on a let's say regular basis, and then this information can be integrated into their different indices and scoring systems, then banks, asset managers, they can easily use this information in order to integrate it into their, let's say, lending policies, or integrate them into, let's say, other criteria that might be important for one or another financial institution. So let's think about the green loan. So maybe also quite a new term for you. We can talk about 2 types of the green loan. One that is linked to this green rating, or green scores, and the second one is the let's say also the lending facility or green loan that is linked to the different key performance indicators that are created on the, let's say, individual basis. Here on the slide, you can see that basically Russian company Polymetal from the mining industry, they, I would say, quite proactive in disclosing this ESG information, and they're doing that for purpose. They're doing that in order to get some benefits, and by linking good environmental performance, and I would say Polymetal is one of the leaders among Russian companies, they basically, thanks to this good performance, they can get better access to capital, and they also can save on, let's say, on interests. So because there is this green loan that really helps to link the interest rate to this sustainability performance. The better the company gets, and in terms of this scoring, the lower there will be the interest that will have to be paid to the bank. What is on the slide is this green loan originated by the Société Générale, and it is based on the ESG key performance indicators, namely on the implementing climate management system, ensuring tailings dam safety. Yeah, so what is important for all the extractive, all the companies that operate in the extractive industry. Then the third indicator is reduction of fresh water use, also occupational health and safety maintains is of paramount importance for their bank and for the company. And the fifth one is for sure support the local communities. Yeah, so these 5 KPIs have been established in a dialogue with the bank by the company, and in order to get this access to 75 million credit facility. I would say Russian mining sector is quite proactive in originating this type of green loans. And we can also mention Rusal and also another transaction of Polymetal with ING Bank that is linked not to the KPIs but to the sustainability index. Yeah, so that we have already mentioned during the lecture. So it's clear that we have to think about this material impact of the sustainability disclosures, that it would be great to have some kind of a regulatory defined play field. And what is also important is that more and more risks, they are associated not with the broad term of ESG, but they are clustering in some, I would say, subsections of these environmental, social, and corporate governance areas. Yeah, so if you will look at the report of the Global Economic Forum that was 2020, the Global Risk Report 2020, then we can see the rising role of the climate-related information. And we can see that the environment-related risks, they account for all 5 of the top 5 global risks by likelihood. So I would say these type of risks, they are likely to materialize in the upcoming 10 years. We are talking about such climate-related events like extreme weather conditions, failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation. Then we can talk about also major natural disaster like earthquakes, tsunami, like volcanic eruption. So as for their, let's say, impact, likelihood, maybe you have heard about these known unknowns. Quite often, experts use this term when they're talking about climate-related risks. Everyone knows that it will happen, but no one knows when it will happen, and no one knows about the magnitude of this type of events. And for sure, many scientists, they're trying to find out, the magnitude of the impact. And while they're doing so, we can see that again, environment-related risks, they account for 3 of the top 5 global risks by impact. So this failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation, then major biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, and also extreme weather events, they by the materiality of the impact. And now let's have a look on different approaches, how we can do that. So how we can integrate this ESG into the, let's say, analysis. On the slide, you can see this integrated approach that might be used by the company or by the investor, by the investment firm that decides to add this extra dimension to their analysis. So it's pretty sure we need to know some sector-specific details. Yeah, then we want, let's say, to invest into oil and gas, or into mining, or into IT technologies. Then what we have to do, we should be able to analyze the, let's say, financial performance, of the company, and usually the conventional approach is used, different multiples, ratios, indicators, liquidity, profitability ratios that might be created by using financial statements. I would say all these instruments and tools, they are familiar to all the investors, and they are part of the curriculum of the business school. But when we are talking about the ESG analysis, I would say many challenges will arise. And I will try to show you what kind of challenges will arise by citing an example of wind turbine manufacturing. I think it's like apparent for all of you who are sitting here that these like green projects or renewable energy projects, they are treated as sustainable by definition. Yeah, so we want to reduce CO2. We want to introduce some mitigation measures. We can basically invest into any renewable energy project. But do you think that all the renewable energy projects basically are sustainable? Yeah, so many experts, they are now trying to give answer to this question. And as an example, we have this SASB approach. We will use indicators, metrics that are used in order to analyze wind energy industry, and to be precise, to analyze manufacturers of their wind turbines. On the slide, I don't know whether you can clearly see it, but we have three companies. We have Siemens Gamesa, yeah, so we have Vestas, and we have Goldwind. It's basically I'm pretty sure you know about the Siemens Gamesa, Vestas, and as for Goldwind, it's Chinese, company that is one of the world leaders in producing wind turbines. If we will follow the logic of the SASB standards, we can talk about three main pillars that have to be used in order to analyze these wind manufacturers. We can talk about the occupational health and safety, yeah? We can talk about the ecological impacts of the project developments, and we can talk about the material sourcing and materials efficiency. Okay, let's start from the end. Let's talk a bit about the material sourcing and materials efficiency. Definitely, if the company can minimize the costs associated with the certain materials, it means that they will be able to improve their cost structure. Yeah, so they can minimize costs. It means that more money, profit will be available to investors. More money will be available to companies in order to invest into other types of, projects, sustainable related projects. And it's clear. So this link between sustainability and financial performance is apparent, I would say, even to the person without the financial background. Then we are talking, therefore, yeah, so why it is it is apparent, therefore, all the companies, they disclose the information that relates to the optimization of the use of materials. Then we are talking about the ecological impacts of project development. So here, like in this area, I would say we can find only partial disclosure or disclosure by the company like the Vesta. The reason for this, because it's not that easy. The companies usually are quite reluctant to disclose information that might infringe or like taint their reputation. Yeah, so it's okay to show some progress in minimizing costs, but if we are talking about the disclosure, let's say the conflicts or problems with the local communities, or let's say the permissions that were rejected due to the public uproar, for sure companies in this particular case they are trying to tread a very fine line and try to be very careful while they are disclosing this type of sensitive information. And the third element is this occupational health and safety. As you can see, all of the companies that are mentioned in this quick research, all of them are disclosing the information, and for instance, like total recordable incident rate or fatality rate, usually companies are trying to release this data. Do you have any idea why? Because quite often it's part of their business. So the manufacturers of turbines, they have some kind of supplementary services. Quite often they also offer to the company, to their clients, their maintenance services. Yeah, so basically, if they are able to keep this total recordable incident rate or fatality rate to the minimum, yeah, and or maybe even to disclose zero results, they are able to attract more customers, also for their extra services, and also for a longer time frame. Yeah, so these are, I would say, three main areas in which SASB is trying to disclose when it comes to the turbine manufacturers. For sure, as I have already mentioned, there are 77 industry specific standards, codified standards that include issues that are important for their particular sector. And as you can see from this example, I would say it's quite easy to manipulate the information, like sustainability related information, and disclose only those parts that either contribute to improved image or like easily attainable. Yeah, and sometimes companies, they try to avoid sensitive issues because all of these standards, they are not mandatory for disclosure. Yeah, so there is so far no mechanism to monitor the completeness of the information that is disclosed, and for sure companies still are not penalized for non-compliance or non-disclosure of some parts. Yeah, so why I mentioned like this SASB approach is that if we will look at the area of renewable energy in Russia and what are the main idea behind like let's say renewable energy installation and production of different photovoltaic panels and wind turbines, I would say it's not the commonly like accepted reason in order to reduce CO2 emissions. Yeah, because if we will look at the European countries, we will see that they use installation of different renewables just to reduce the CO2 emissions, also to get access to the domestically produced energy. And yeah, usually it's part of the decarbonization strategy. If we are talking about Russian experience, we have to stress that we are talking about more, willingness to create domestic export-oriented industry just to beef up, to scale up revenues and to reinforce these as export-oriented activities. In doing so, they should understand that there is a need not only to think about the productivity, about the capacity factors, but there is also a need to integrate these sustainability-related metrics, the metrics, for instance, that are offered by SASB, in order to compete with the international companies that already occupy this niche. Yeah, and for sure are not going to provide their they're not going to give their own position on the market to newcomers. Yeah, so that's important to understand that if the company is taking seriously this export-oriented strategy of their renewables, they have to launch this additional dimension for their analysis. Yeah. So I hope that this example with the renewable energy that is based on the SASB standards will show you that not each project that, let's say, deals with the energy efficiency or renewable energy will be labeled as sustainable if we will apply these stringent sustainability related standards or yardstick that are offered by this, let's say, SASB, TCFD, and CDP initiatives. If we are talking about experience, which we can share, I would like to maybe focus during the rest of the time on the pilot project on TCFD. Yeah, so it was a joint British and Russian partnership project. Yeah, that was the main aim of it was to build knowledge and leadership on the climate disclosure in Russia. Among the main goals of this project, I can highlight that the Russian consultancies, they were supposed to be equipped with skills and experience in order to provide TCFD advice for the Russian companies. Then we had, these 4 pioneers, 4 Russian businesses to support the analysis of their climate change risk, opportunities, and strategies. I would say from the very beginning, I think we can disclose this information that it was 2 companies from the pulp and paper sector and 2 companies from the mining sector. And so the third goal of this project was to provide an overview of the TCFD in Russia to help accelerate proactive action on the climate change. Yeah, so now I will try, just in a very concise way to explain what are the main ideas and methodologies behind TCFD. Basically, what makes it so unique against the background of other initiatives is that TCFD helps to categorize climate-related risks and opportunities for the companies. We can talk about 2 types of risks. We can talk about the transition risk namely policy and legal risk, that for instance increased pricing of carbon through national and international schemes might be observed. Think about this border adjustment tax, so that the Russian companies, oil and gas companies, mining companies, they will have to once this a tax is imposed, they will have to pay it. So they will have to join the emission trading scheme of European Union in order to compensate the excessive, let's say, emissions of CO2 of their products. Then we can talk about the technological risk, so that the let's say the companies don't have access to certain renewable technologies. Therefore, let's say many Russian companies, they're trying now to build joint ventures or different partnerships with the international companies in order to produce, let's say, blades or some other parts for the wind turbine. So in order exactly to avoid this type of transition risk. Then we can talk about the market risk, so we can talk about different uncertainties and shifts in market dynamics that also has to be integrated into the analysis. Then transition risk also they include reputational risk, and basically, the companies, they have to keep up with the changing expectations of consumers. They have to keep up with the changing lifestyles of the consumers and business. Also, this trend for inclusion of different sustainable practices into their or sustainable products into their product menu. Then, okay, I think that more or less clear with the transition risk. Then there is another very important category that is called physical risk. And in this case, we can talk about the acute physical risk. For instance, then the infrastructure is completely destroyed or ruined by some adverse or severe weather event, like that I mentioned, the typhoons that you can easily observe in Taiwan. Also, we can talk about the chronic physical risk. Then we are talking about changing long-term weather patterns such as temperatures and rainfall. Think about the oil and gas projects, that are, let's say, initiated by Novatek, the projects that are initiated by Rosneft. Many of them, they are located in the Arctic zone, and basically the physical risk, exactly chronic physical risk, they might damage the let's say, or infringe the stability of the whole infrastructure. Of paramount importance will be, this the fluctuation of the temperature around zero. So the roads, the infrastructure will be subjected to the devastating impact of this temperature, that is close to zero, melting. Roads might also represent a threat for and represent the base for the disruption of deliveries, and I would say things like that. If we are talking about the climate-related opportunities, we have to think about this resource efficiency, like the one that was mentioned for the production of the wind turbines. We have to talk about different energy sources. Because at the moment, if we will take the report of Lazard, we will see that the cost curves of renewables, they are becoming even more and more attractive, especially when we compare the gas capital expenditures associated with the gas-fired plant and capital expenditures associated with the wind park. Yeah, so they are in many sites. They are already like comparable and might be like substitute one for another. Then we can talk about the productivity. Yeah, so basically production of new green products like the aluminium, for instance, that is using instead of coal energy is using hydro energy or geothermal energy might be a good example of benefits, of opportunities that are usually associated with the climate change. Yeah, so we can talk about the attraction of the new customers. We can talk about the let's say we can talk about charging their margin on this green products. So these are also associated with the climate-related opportunities. We also can talk about the tapping the new markets and where the companies that are pioneers they might let's say they might get a lot of benefits as first movers. Then we can talk about the resilience. Yeah, so it's also an opportunity. So basically companies that are proactive and they are disclosing the information related to this climate change, they are trying to let's say substitute dirty energy with their cleaner option. They are trying to let's say introduce some energy efficiency options. They are trying to talk to government, like to the governmental officials, to policymakers, and try to play a role in establishing this like new regulatory, let's say, play field. For sure, if the company is active in this climate-related area, then they might de-risk own portfolio. Yeah, they can assure the investors that they will comply and that they can comply without significant costs and damages to their reputation with, let's say, new regulation. Yeah, so on the next slide, you can see that one of the main tools, yeah, that is used by the TCFD is this scenario-based analysis. So it's what is again so unique about this TCFD approach is that they are not using historical data in order to evaluate let's say the green profile or climate-related profile of the company, but they are trying to use the forward-looking data, yeah, in order to do that. And what you can see that this scenario analysis really helps to explore different combination of future physical and transition risk. And if we will now look at the slide, you can see that we can talk about the orderly transition. Yeah, so then the, let's say, transition risks and physical risk, they are minimized. Yeah, so the company is keeping an eye on the different external conditions, on regulation, on the marketplace, on the customer preferences, and also they are trying to adapt to the physical risk. Yeah, they're trying to reinforce the infrastructure, to rebuild it in order to reduce the physical risk. We can also talk about the companies. So the hotter it gets, yeah, the more physical risk will be on the scene. So like the more physical risk will be observed by different market players. Yeah, so if, for instance, the companies are not ready to react, to respond to this enhanced level of physical risk, then we are talking about the scenario that is close to like failure to act. Yeah, so the companies, they will have to cover huge losses associated with the climate related physical risk. Then we can also talk about, let's say, situation there the physical risks are put under control, but at the very same time the transition risk is not like the control mechanisms are not in place, and in this case we are talking about the disorderly transition, yeah, to the, let's say, to the future. And in the middle, yeah, we can find the situation there. Let's say both of risk, they are kept. Companies are trying to do something, but it's nowhere near enough in order to, let's say, avoid these negative implications associated with the global temperature increase. But what is important is that the TCFD framework is based on the 4 pillars. Then we are talking about the TCFD. We are talking about the governance, yeah? So we are talking about the initiative that requires the board of directors, the management, to align their information flow. So basically there is a need to illustrate, the need for the company to illustrate how climate-related information flows up and down, like the organization, between teams, departments, and to tell the truth, like based on our experience, that's one of the difficult and complex issue because many departments, they cannot see their tangential points, yeah, so they know how to disclose financial information, yeah, they know how to report on some, let's say, ecological aspects of of operations or of production, but they sometimes cannot understand how to sit, like how to put all the arguments on the table and how to discuss them, and how to provide the information in order to, let's say, analyze some ecological or climate-related issues from the financial standpoint, even within the organization. Not to mention how to disclose this information to the external users of this data. Then usually if we are talking about some expectations on behalf of the investors, so what should be included into the report under the element governance, usually investors, they want to see the roles of board of directors and managers, so like who is in charge basically, and how frequently these issues are addressed and discussed by the board, and for sure how management is going to monitor these climate-related issues. One of the most proactive approach that I can mention, it's this energy company Eni. It's an Italian company, and I would say they have managed to develop a strategic plan like how to decarbonize different business lines and also support functions. They also disclose how frequently the CEO and management have to interact on these issues, like climate-related issues. But what is important, that they even try to integrate the climate change into this short-term incentive plan. Yeah, so basically the remuneration of the chief executive officer is aligned with the climate strategy and with the implementation of the climate strategy. I would say if we are like using not an example of oil and gas companies, but let's say mining, Polymetal is also trying to establish a link let's say between the social performance of the company, like the social metrics, and remuneration of heads of division and also top management. So that's extremely important, that the whole organization has to understand that let's say if their results are not achieved, if their climate-related risks are not mitigated, then the departments, let's say, will be penalized, or they might be, somehow, let's say, motivated to react correspondingly in order to improve their situation. Then we can talk about the strategy. We have to consider different time horizons, and while we are evaluating this climate-related risk, and we have to let's say provide a list of different risks that will fall into the category of transition or physical risk. But what is important, then we are talking about the sectors, and then they are talking about the extractive industry in particular. We have to keep in mind the operational stage, because we have deposits, and I would say operational life of some mines, of some deposits, it is limited, and exactly for this reason, sometimes we cannot apply this scenario-based analysis, let's say in the period that exists this operational stage. And that's, I would say, also our observation while we have been working on this project. So there is a need to understand what sector is under analysis. And if we are talking about best practices and how they look like, I can cite you an example of Equinor. Statoil, the former name of this energy company, and they are really trying to specify, I would say, different types of risks, like oil and gas demand, renewable energy demand, and they try to to create a list of corresponding actions, management actions that will help to placate, to minimize, to mitigate this risk depending on their strategy. So usually it looks like a list of different climate-related risks and what kind of actions are required on behalf of management or board of directions. Then we are talking about the third important element of TCFD. It's important to understand how basically these climate risks will be integrated into the general risk management approach. So we have to identify that climate risk is is identified properly, and that is part of the overall risk management system. Then we have to create this prioritization matrix that I have been discussing a moment ago. So usually that's the commonly acceptable approach that is used. I would say an example of any company really stands out against other companies because what they are trying to do, yes, that's true, they have a risk assessment model, But what they are trying to do, they try to combine the quantitative approach with the qualitative one. Yeah, so on one hand, they try to establish a link between different quantitative impacts like net profit or cash flows, production, and also qualitative impacts. They are delineated like environmental, health, safety, reputation, social, and so on. And they also include these prioritization metrics. But what is important is they are trying to execute or do their gap analysis. With every sustainable related, like this, any sustainable project or sustainability related project, they are trying to conduct the assessment at the inherent level. Yeah, so let's say before the execution of this project, and then at the residual level. So what they are trying to do, they are trying to identify this delta, yeah, so this sustainable delta that is quite often required by the recommendation of TCFD and by the investors. And the last component, one of the, I would say, most important, but at the very same time, since it's like not subjected to the mandatory disclosure standards, I would say this element also provides a great degree of flexibility to the companies. Basically, we are talking about the targets that are set by the company with respect to climate change, and we are also talking about different metrics like CO2 emissions of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Yeah, so on the then we move on the next slide. You can see an example of energy company, Total, and in their reports, I would say they set different targets that relate to flaring, energy efficiency, different targets relate to the CO2 reductions, and for sure they have to report the progress in achieving this target to date. Yeah. So they also trying to disclose, I would say, the all three elements that are dedicated to the greenhouse gas emissions. So we are talking about direct greenhouse gas emissions, and also let's say one of the future actions, or one of the plans for the future for this company might be also disclose the scope 3, so the CO2 emissions associated with their supply chain, yeah, for this particular company. Okay, yeah, so I would say it's pretty much it when it comes to the main elements of the TCFD. So what we have learned that still there is I would say room for improvement for every company, because it's I would say it's not a static term, or it's not a static concept, it's dynamic, and it's extremely important to acknowledge their mistakes, to acknowledge that, let's say, we at the moment don't have access to the CO2 information based on the site level. Let's say only some sites can provide that type of climate-related information. That's okay. It's, you know, it's just this TCFD approach, I would say it's a way to create a to-do list for the future, and how the companies from different sectors might start thinking about these climate-related issues in order to comply with the new challenges, with the new regulatory approaches, and yeah, so with that types of threats that for sure are important and are observable for many sectors. So since we are talking about the sustainability related disclosures, and we are talking about this extra dimension for the investment analysis, what is extremely important is to understand that it will provide benefits only like if it goes hand in hand with the conventional financial approach. Yeah, so it's not a substitution of the conventional financial analysis. It's just some kind of a way to reinforce it, to make the quality of the analysis higher, and to protect a wider range of stakeholders, and yeah, so at the end of the day, increase profit or minimize costs. Yeah, so thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer to them.
Thank you. My name is Maxim. I have two questions. First question, if I'm managing a state-owned company, what would be my reason to implement Russian state-owned company? What would be my reason to implement environmental, social governance recommendations and disclosure, and especially climate-related financial disclosure? And second question, if I'm managing a private company and I understand that I need it, what would be your advice how to start?
Okay, thank you for your question. If we are talking about the state-owned enterprise, yeah, we have to understand that in this case we have to keep an eye on the transition risks. Yeah, so we have to understand that the state-owned enterprise have connections to international markets that might impose, let's say, stringent regulation in terms of climate change. Yeah, let's talk about this border tax. Even state-owned companies, where they will have to comply with this external regulation, and they will have to start integrating it. So that's the reason why also state-owned companies have to consider climate-related risks and initiatives that help to disclose these risks in their reports. And as for the second question, if you're like the privately owned companies, so what is the starting point? Good question. Basically, it's extremely important to maybe to create a list of what has already been done and what has to be done in the future in order to comply with the standards, let's say TCFD. So sometimes companies, they already have the information related to, let's say, sustainability issues or related to the climate-related issues, but let's say it's not organized in such a way, it's not, let's say, categorized, it's not collected, and for sure it's not disclosed. So the first is just, to see what is already there, so to analyze it, and then to create a to-do list, what parts are missing, yeah, what has to be done in order to get these missing parts, yeah, so that's, so some kind of, yeah, just to create a checklist for your company.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for interesting and a bit complicated for me personally.